I am an ecologist, and my specialty is coral reefs and coral reef management. So I'm going to be approaching sustainable financing for protected areas from that perspective and not from the perspective of a hard economist, which I will never be. And kudos to you. So I'm going to start by telling you a little bit about the organization I work for and what we're doing. And then, as you can see from the first slide, I'm going to present the pitch deck for a project we're currently working on in Turneffe Atoll in Belize, which will take you through all the different elements of such a project and what some of the issues are and what we're trying to achieve. So first of all, Blue Finance. Blue Finance is a small NGO, and we work at providing sustainable financing for marine protected areas. And I hope everyone knows what a marine protected area is. I should say also, if you have any questions, I'm happy with you interrupting me to ask your questions or put them in the chat, however you see fit. So I'll discuss all of these in this presentation. And I should say perhaps that one of the gap between financing and conservation, I would say it used to be huge. It's getting smaller and smaller, but one of the things that we can't quite um, not handle, I don't think handle is the right word. One of the glaring issues with conservation financing is that nature takes a really long time for the impacts of conservation to be seen, to be felt, and investments often need to show a return in very, very short time frames. So I'm just going to put that out there as one of the big issues that we're dealing with in conservation finance, and that you young minds might be able to find a solution for. So this is a pitch for Turneffe. As I said, it's a project we're working on. Forget the disclaimer. So we're looking at impact investment in marine protected areas, and using it for communities in Turneffe Atoll. It's a tiny atoll off the island of Belize. Um, I am sure, all know even better than I do what impact investment is, but I will talk a little bit about it in this. Um, what impacts are we hoping to get? Enhanced food security and incomes for coastal communities, jobs in nature tourism, and of course, vibrant coral reef and mangrove and seagrass bed ecosystems, which will lead to greater resilience to specific climate change impacts. How we're doing it is via blended finance, US 1.2 million. And we're doing it via ecotourism facilities, management, mangrove restoration, etc. The idea is for MPAs to generate their own incomes and to become financially sustainable by 2023. I'll talk a bit about that also. And this project is led by NGOs in collaboration with the government, fishing communities, and it's scalable. So we're looking at doing it in other MPA regions, other MPA projects in the region. Okay, so let's get into it. So marine protected areas are marine spaces where we zoom in on protection and conservation in this little area that has been designated by law. And within it, you tend to have areas that are zoned for specific things. So some areas will be zoned for no fishing, for example. Some areas will be zoned for recreational use. Some areas will be zoned for a combination of the two. But it's all with an idea of conservation and sustainability. And the hope is that, and the science has shown in some cases when effectively managed, that the health of marine ecosystems within MPAs is definitely, in terms of fish, at least. Obviously, if you stop fishing in one area, the fish will increase and multiply, spill over, etc. There's a really important link between fish and corals because the fish keep the corals clean, many of them, the herbivores anyway. So fish need corals need fish. So the idea is that if we increase the numbers of fish, we will increase the health of corals. It's not only fish we're looking at, though. We're looking at land-based sources of marine pollution. We're looking at physical damage from anchors. So again, we're zooming in on this area and we're concentrating all of our conservation efforts here in order to improve the health. So marine protected areas are one of the most important and effective tools for coral reef management. When we improve that coral reef ecosystem, then I'm not sure how much you know about coral reefs, but for small island developing states especially, the only reason they have nearshore fisheries is because of that coral reef, which acts as an oasis in a desert. So once you improve the health of that reef, you will improve food security, fishing incomes. Coral reefs are responsible for beaches. They provide the sand and they also protect it from high energy waves. So there are a bunch of things that corals are important for, and their ecosystem services provide a host of benefits. Marine protected areas are usually um, financed in a kind of, bit by bit, insufficient short-term funding, usually by governments. And I guess to some extent it's understandable. I mean, if you are dealing with poverty in your as a government, you're not going to make that immediate link between poverty and a healthy marine ecosystem, even though there is a link. I'm just saying that most governments will run and put all their money into education, poverty, etc. Usually there's not a lot left over for conservation. That's a global issue. Um, so financing is usually insufficient. It's piecemeal because it's based on grants. And I think, with grants, you write a lot of stuff for a grant, you get the grant, and then you keep writing and keep writing and keep writing and trying to get more and more grants. And that's no way to manage a long term because you don't know if you're going to get the next grant, right? Um, MPAs often and or should um, employ user fees. So you're coming into marine protected area and you pay an additional amount for the protection and conservation of that area. And that is a way of becoming financially sustainable. The problem is that many user fees go into governments, go into government coffers, and it's really, really hard to get them back out of those coffers in order to actually manage. Because again, once it goes into the government coffer and they need money for education and crime and all of that, it tends to go there. Um, but they can become financially sustainable with user fees. Okay. In many cases, they're also lacking upfront capital and basic social entrepreneurial skills. So I'm not sure how much you know about marine protected areas, but they need money. For people to pay additional for these areas, things need to be in place, right? So there are rules and regulations. So that means that you need to have an enforcement team, which means you need to have a boat, you need to have fuel. You want people not to drop their anchors on the reef, so you need to have permanent moorings in place so people can just tie up and not have to drop their anchor. You want people to adhere to the rules and regulations, so you need to have a communication and education plan. I'm from Barbados. Most Barbadians cannot swim. The island is this big, huge sea, and most of them still can't swim. So to talk to people about coral reefs and how important they are to their lives, they can't really see it, they can't visualize it, they don't really care. um, so we have to deal with communication and education. I'm saying all that just to say NPAs need money. Okay. um, and they often lack that upfront capital. And also, a lot of people who work in MPAs are people like me, right? They're ecologists, they're marine biologists. They don't know anything about entrepreneurial skills, which is a problem because we need money. So there are opportunities with marine protected areas, and Turneffe Atoll Marine Reserve is a really good example because they already have a non-profit NGO that is responsible for managing their MPA. And the head of that is a guy who came from tourism and who was an entrepreneur. So he is someone who already understands, look, we need money and we need to make this financially sustainable, and we can't rely on government to do that. So it provides an attractive opportunity to invest in one of the largest MPAs in Belize. Apart from that, it's absolutely gorgeous. Healthy, beautiful coral reefs, seagrass beds, mangrove swamps. I mean, sharks, whales, dolphin. It's gorgeous. Um, Subsidy from government covers 40% of budget needs, and this is going to go down. And this pitch was written before COVID, so you know everybody's scrambling to take care of their citizens in a time of COVID. So even that 40% that was promised before is going to go down. But this MPA, like I said, it's a magical garden. It has the potential to generate critical finance from nature fees paid by visitors, ecotourism enterprises, and also setting up blue carbon project with the mangroves. They have extensive mangrove ecosystems. So it's a joint venture of TASA, and TASA is the Turneffe Atoll Sustainability, Turneffe Atoll Sustainability, and the co-management entity of Blue Finance, which is my company, as well as conservation business developers. So just some pretty pictures. In order for this to work, it needs to be a legal agreement, right? So we've signed a lease for the co-management to the Turneffe Atoll Marine Reserve in 2013. They already have staffing, they have rangers, they have a comprehensive science monitoring program, ecotourism, financial, and great financial management. So unlike many of our other projects, they already had a very firm base that we could use to move into sustainable financing for them. Just who we are, just enough to say that, you know, we're a combination of marine scientists, financiers. We have a country director in each country that we work in. And we also have, you know, tourism, blue carbon, MPA finance, just a wealth of disciplines within the team. So let's skip all that and skip all that and skip all that. So this is where Turneffe is. Belize is part of this area with Honduras, Guatemala, Mexico. They're actually, they're very happy to tell me that they have the second largest barrier reef in the world. And Mexico came to them and came to them with the idea of calling it the Mesoamerican Barrier Reef that includes Mexico, Guatemala, and Honduras. But really, the biggest part of it belongs to Belize, and the rest of it is just for marketing. 130,000 hectares, 11,000 hectares of mangroves, and a hotspot of biodiversity. It's also, surprisingly, I didn't know much about this, but a world-class area for fly fishing, which is catch and release. So they catch the poor fish, they get the hooks in their mouths, they take the hooks out and they throw them back in, and everybody hopes that the fish will be fine after that. I really don't know much about it. There are, however, about 1,000 fishers on the poverty line. Of course, tourism is massive. It's high-end tourism on Turneffe. So they have few resorts, but you pay quite a lot to stay there per night. They're boutique high-end resorts. So, I mean, there's a lot of potential here, right? Because, I mean, we rely on tourism to produce the user fees that will then make conservation sustainable. But then the idea is that, you know, you don't want to have too many visitors. You don't want to exceed that carrying capacity so that the numbers actually then have a negative impact on the ecosystem that you're trying to preserve. So Turneffe is actually fabulous because there are few people paying a lot of money, and the impacts are less, obviously, with those fewer people. Just some information on the reserve, created in 2012. It's the largest MPA in Belize, and it's 20% no-take. So this no-take means that you cannot take anything from that area, which is a huge, huge issue for fishers, especially fishers who have been fishing in that area before we were born. And then, you know, one day somebody turns up and says, you can't fish here anymore. That obviously is not going to work. It has not worked. So in situations like this, we also have to have quite a bit of education and communication with fishers, explaining why this area should be a no-take zone, give them evidence that a situation like this works. Um, and in some cases, provide alternative income generation activities for them, especially the younger fishers. If they have an alternative to fishing, they'll do something else. So we're not trying to shut down fishing industries and marine protected areas, but we're definitely trying to change. We would like to reduce the number of fishers. There's no two ways about that, but also change how fishers fish, right? So don't throw dynamite into the coral reef, which makes it very easy for you then to collect fish. It's easy, right? But it also destroys coral, and it destroys a whole bunch of fish you don't want. If you're putting a fish pot in there, at least have a mesh size that is large so that the juveniles can get out, things like that. We are all looking, and this is also saying, when people say, but why do MPAs need money? It's for things like this. But I digress. So the proposal, which I think you are perhaps most interested in, the investment will finance the development of ecotourism facilities, MPA surveillance equipment, and mangrove restoration projects. Critical finance will be generated through nature fees and blue carbon credits and ecotourism tours. And I'm going to give a caveat, not a caveat, but blue carbon credits, I know very little about. It seems like this magic thing that everybody's talking about. And it is very, very new. And we are now investigating if it's really feasible, or if it is this kind of ethereal thing that everybody's talking about, but actually has no substance. So please don't ask me any questions about blue carbon credits. We're now working our way through that. Revenues will finance MP activities in community development, new jobs, some for fishers, ecosystem conservation, environmental education, and of course, compliance. We're expecting revenues of about $1 million US per annum, and this will cover 90% of the MPA's operational needs. Okay, and again, we're working with TASA, Turneffe Atoll Sustainability Association. What are we going to do? We're going to sink a wreck. We were there 2 weeks ago, looking at site selection and so on. The dive shops have all indicated this is what they want. So we're going to sink a ship as a new underwater attraction for divers and snorkelers, and we will charge for that. We're looking at high revenue sea safari tours. Again, a few people, tailor-made for these few people, and charge them a lot of money. And creative marketing campaigns. It's important for people to know what they're paying for, right? We're not just going to charge a high fee and walk away. We're going to charge a high fee because you are going to get a quality education and tour out of what you're paying for, and this money will go back into conservation. So the financing needs for the next year have been estimated to be US 1.2 million. For the CAPEX, we will provide these new ecotourism facilities and services, develop the tours, improve visitor experience and safety, all the things mentioned here, and of course, hire the staff that are required or that will be required to get all these in place. Going to look at a mangrove restoration and conservation project, MPA vessels, scientific equipment for effective enforcement and compliance. So this is a blended finance investment that we're looking at. Okay, it's a combination, and blended finance better than I do, I'm sure. So there is debt financing coming from the Sustainable Ocean Fund, which is managed by Althelia Morova, and catalytic financing is coming from sponsors and performance grants. And the thing is that so for conservation financing, many of us, and I'm putting myself for the ecologists, we don't understand this whole impact investment blended financing stuff. This is not what we do. And it is taking a bit of a sea change for ecologists and conservationists to understand this brave new world, and to see how they can fit into it. So conservation financing, for the most part, as I mentioned before, it's come from governments and it's also come from grants. So we know grants and we know governments very well. Debt financing, we don't know. But the good thing about a situation like this is that once you get the debt financing, and the debt financing you have to repay, which is something we're not accustomed to. We're not accustomed to repaying. We're accustomed to writing a beautiful grant proposal and getting money with no strings attached, apart from writing a few reports, right? But with debt financing, once you get it, so the grantors are saying, wow, okay, so they're serious. They're actually going to up their game. They're going to be generating revenues and improving the ecosystem. So you know what? If they have this debt financing, then I'm going to attach my grant to that. So that's what's been happening. We have been, finalizing these deals with the impact investors, and big grantees have been saying, okay, well, if they're going to be that responsible, then I want my grant attached to that. So it's actually attracting additional finance to the MPAs. And the rest of this is really blah 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 and pretty pictures. So we have evidence-based outcomes, and then it's not really blah blah blah. I shouldn't have said that, because with the impact investment, you have to show. And so we're working on a set of key performance indicators. You have to show that the money that you got from them has provided these outcomes. And again, they are social. So we expect 1,000 artisanal fishers to be supported. And they're environmental. We expect to protect 132,000 hectares of coral and 30 endangered species. And of course, they're also financial. They have to get a return on investment. And with each MPA, we look at what revenues can be generated, and we work out a sensible return on investment for the investors, and something that is doable, that the MPA can actually achieve. So I've mentioned all of these already, what the MPA activities are, what the money will be used for: community development, compliance, monitoring and science, biodiversity conservation and restoration, sustainable revenues, and management. One of the first things we did in Turneffe actually was hire a business development officer to help us, make the area more, I guess, financially attractive would be it. So the approach is sustainable. The MPA will generate its own revenues and receive major financing from blended finance. This does not negate the responsibility of government. The government has responsibility for all of this. So the government will maintain its key functions, which in this case, the government of Belize actually does quite a lot in terms of conservation, but obviously they don't have the facilities to effectively manage all of the MPAs around Belize. But I just want to say that they still maintain overall responsibility for rules and regulations for the MPAs. But the MPA is guided by an advisory committee. It's formed by public, NGOs, and academic sectors. And of course, strong relationships have to be made with government, fishing organizations, and tourism stakeholders. Yeah, and I think that is it. That's about all I wanted to say. Any questions?
Awesome. Thank you so much, Angie. Yeah, so if you have any questions, feel free to raise your hands, that function in Zoom, or you can type them in the chat and I will read those out for us. Change view. I'll ask a question real quick. Does Blue Finance are they working on any other projects at the moment? Or are you very focused on this marine protected area in Belize?
We are very focused on this marine protected area in Belize, but we're also working in the Philippines, in Oriental Mindoro. We have a project in Cape Verde. We are re-establishing a project in Grenada. That's stalled. We're looking at a project in Mozambique. We're looking at one in St. Lucia. So yeah, we do have other projects ongoing, but I would say Belize is the furthest along.
Gotcha. Does anybody have any questions? Aiden has one, and Saf. So Aiden asks, how long does it typically take for an MPA to become self-sufficient financially?
Well, that's a really good question. Our deals with the impact investors are between 8 and 10 years. So what should I say? Our our suggestion and what we believe based on other MPAs that have become sustainable, financially sustainable, which are mainly private MPAs actually. They're not MPAs that actually have a government component. So our belief is that depending on the MPA, but within 8 to 10 years, that should be enough time for them to be financially self-sufficient. So this is, not only, bringing in the user fees, but also establishing a culture of entrepreneurship within an organization that typically, does not have it. So I'd say between 8 to 10 years. And Safua, do we have a presence on social? You know what? This is so funny. If we have a presence on social media, because this is what we have been discussing quite a lot within the last 2 weeks. Do we hire a social media person or not? Because I'm terrible on Twitter. Um, do we do it or not? And we really had a deep conversation about if it's really necessary and important. I mean, who are we trying to attract, right? We have a web page. We have a web page and we have a LinkedIn account that we sporadically post to. But really, we need for MPAs to be aware that there's this new other way of of financing their areas, the MPA managers, and we're not so sure that that is going to happen from, Twitter, for example. Um, we have been, crazily attending meetings, and most of the project that we've gotten have been from word of mouth. But we do have a website. We're now thinking about whether it does make sense to invest in someone to handle, Twitter and LinkedIn and everything else. Um, and also it's we are not so much. I mean, I have a Facebook page where I speak about MPAs and MPA conservation and all that, but really that is a part of what we do. But the biggest part of what we do is the finance. And I am not really sure that social media is the best way for that. But I am also old. Not old, but old. I'm not your age, right? So it's also a different culture and a different climate than what I'm accustomed to. So Safua, I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing your name incorrectly, but if you have any suggestions for me, I would love to hear them. Do we encounter any opposition to our work? If so, who does it come from and how do you manage it? Yes, we encounter a lot of opposition. Did I mention I'm from Barbados? And our biggest flop has actually come from Barbados, which hurts me to the core because I worked there as a marine biologist for 18 years. So yes, we do encounter opposition because, as I mentioned before, conservation entities are not accustomed to paying and to getting debt finance. We don't do that. We don't get loans. Like I said, we get it from government, or we write up our grants and there are no strings attached other than, having to provide a few reports. So this is new. And we have encountered opposition from governments, one, who are not able to manage their MPAs because they don't have the money and the staff, but they also don't want to give up um, any of their power to someone else to co-manage. And co-management is a big part of this because remember, our fees cannot go back into government. If they go back into government, they'll never come back out, right? So that's another thing. Governments, if don't want to lose these fees, if they ever got them, they don't want to lose them. They don't want to give up their power. And the third one is the first one I mentioned, which is this hesitation to get involved in debt financing for conservation because it's something, that we are not accustomed to. So I would say those are the three areas. And then yeah, also, there's this perception that it's conservation, so it doesn't need money. What do you need money for? And that is coming from, in some cases, the marine service providers like the dive shops and so on, who don't want to start charging their guests an additional fee to enter the park. So parks is supposed to, be like parks on land. You come into, you pay your user fee, you go in. But in Barbados, for example, there are no user fees right now. So everyone is accustomed accessing the sea free of charge, and it's our heritage, et cetera, et cetera. So if you now want to come in, sorry, after that horse has bolted and implement a user fee, right? People are going to be like, but why? We've done this all this time, without any user fees, but we haven't done it right. Certainly haven't put the money into it that should be into it. So, maybe that's where your social media comes in, Safua. Also, to educate people as, what, marine parks need money. They need money. So yeah, sorry, that's a long answer to your question. Sorry. Um, how much emphasis is put on the evidence-based outputs comparing more traditional grants versus private finance? Wow, let me read that again. How much emphasis is put on the evidence-based outcomes comparing more traditional grants? So I would say that we've looked at this in the I would say that this is why we have this project, because they are so many, and I would say the majority of MPs on this planet are what we call paper parks. This is why our project has come about in the first place, and it's because they look gorgeous on paper, but there's actually no actual implementation of rules and regulations or management as a whole. So that's a global issue, and there's slew of scientific papers. There's Gill in, I think it was 2018. If you want some scientific papers, just email me and I'll give you a bunch of them. And then at the same time, there are these private MPAs that are doing great. They're absolutely doing very well, and they're proven that MPAs can be sustainable, can be financially sustainable. So I would say I haven't written, a scientific paper about the difference between traditional grants versus private finance, but I've worked in marine conservation for 2 decades. Um, and it's very clear that the traditional grants are not doing what they're supposed to do, which is based also on the fact that the people who get grants keep asking for grants, asking for grants, asking for grants, and the grantees are also grantors are at a place of professional of fatigue, and thinking, oh my gosh, I gave this grant, I'm giving this grant, what do I actually have to prove for it? So I would say quite a lot of emphasis is placed on it, um, on on um, on the two, between traditional grants and private finance. But the thing is, I'm sorry to belabor this point, but the thing is, private finance is not all roses either, right? Because you do have to pay it back, and MPs are not going to generate a lot of money. Nobody's going to get rich off of MPA. That is not going to, it's absolutely not going to happen. And even with the deals that we're structuring, in some cases, the interest is too high for the MPAs, and it's also something for the investment world to understand, that MPAs are not like your traditional investment, not even your traditional conservation investment, because you're not going to get a lot of money out of it. And if you put a huge interest rate on this financing, then this thing is not going to work either. Um, and we should get on the social media train. May not see the direct link between that and getting finance, but if a population is sensitive, it might help your impression government. You know, I have spent so much time trying to educate people about marine conservation. So I agree with you completely. Um, yeah, but I kind of tired. But you're right. Social media is perhaps a very good way just to educate. Right now I'm focusing on, getting these um getting these MPs financially sustainable. And it would also be a really good way to kind of trumpet our successes. Um, and I'm thinking also with the younger generation, and I'm sounding very old at this point in time. Thank you very much. Yeah.
I was gonna ask, excuse me, real quick. I guess how has your personal just like perception of ocean conservation, like how has that changed over time, and what you think are like the main goals, or your personal main goals, I guess.
Well, I'm jaded, so I'm not the right person to ask this to, I have to say. I mean, I started out thinking I could change the world um, in terms of conservation, and I have been very much so put in my place and realize that I cannot do it in the face of governments that do not want to change. So I have come from thinking once you have the knowledge, the passion, um, and the intention to create change, it will happen. Now I'm not so sure. Now I really think in terms of conservation. I'm going to give an example. So, for example, I used to organize and do beach and underwater cleanups for months. I would say I spent 20 years of my life organizing and getting up at 5 in the morning and doing these cleanups. And after about 2 decades, I realized it's the same people or the same groups getting up and cleaning up other people's garbage when we have excellent legislation on littering. I wasn't seeing any changes made, and quite frankly, I just stopped. Um, all of my passion for that particular one just died, and I started advocating for, you know what? Let's start charging and finding some people. So my view has changed from kind of kumbaya, let's save the world together with love and song and music, and it's changed to yes, let's educate everyone, but let us penalize people when they do things that are wrong and don't that's the only way that's the only way I see our conservation working, which doesn't sound very good, but that's where I am right now.
Yeah, no, I mean it's an honest answer, and it's a realistic answer, so I appreciate that. Yeah, staff had another question. Do you engage in coral breeding in tanks, then deploying them in the ocean? Don't know if there's a name for this, but seems like a practice that's increasingly adopted for coral restoration all over the world.
Okay, so this is another okay, so I've changed my, you're talking about coral restoration. People call it coral gardening. It's a form of active restoration rather than the passive restoration, which is, like integrated coastal zone management and looking at holistic ways of reducing land-based sources of marine pollution. Um, and when it started, I thought it was rubbish, quite frankly. This is when it started because we know what the issues are. We have known what the issues are from long time. We know our primary issues with corals are um, land-based sources of marine protection, land-based sources of marine pollution. Sorry, the nutrients from land. We've known that. We've known that unsustainable fishing is a major issue. We've known this for ages. So why aren't we dealing with it? Why aren't we dealing with that? Instead, we're going to say, oh, okay, we can plant corals. We can grow them in labs or in the sea, and we can plant them out. And we're going to plant them out into the same dirty water and the same heavily fished area that killed their predecessors. To me, it made absolutely no sense. And I have to say, I had complete tunnel vision about this for many, many years. Um, which is really funny because now I'm working on a PhD and coral restoration is a major part of it. So all my friends are laughing at me. Um, but with global climate change, I will say that has added with high temperatures, which causes coral bleaching, which maybe, well, you can message me if you need more information on that. But basically, corals live with these little plants. Plants generate most of the energy for them to grow. And when it gets too hot, corals get stressed and they boot the plants out, which means they're kicking out their food supply. And it's called bleaching. And I'm sure you all know about global climate change. It's getting hotter and hotter. Corals are bleaching more often and it increases their mortality. So, with that on top of land-based sources of marine pollution, unsustainable fishing, physical damage from anchors, tourists walking all over them. It's a bit much for corals. Um, the situation is getting so bad now that I'm like, okay, okay, okay. Let's deal with all of them, right? And if you can grow corals, and people are doing some amazing things with growing corals right now, if that is a part of the solution and not being sold as the solution, then I'm all for it. So it's now, forming part of a toolbox. And what's really good about coral restoration now that wasn't happening before is that people are looking for those heat tolerant corals. They're looking for those corals that actually have a resistance to specific things. So, for example, corals are not supposed to like sediment, and then you go into a port and you find these beautiful, massive pseudoastrias that are existing where everyone said they couldn't. Clearly, there's some sort of resilience there. So, what restoration practitioners are doing now is like taking those corals, and those corals are resistant to bleaching, and those corals are resistant to acidification, etc., and they're propagating those, and they're planting out those. So there's still a lot of issues with restoration. I could do a whole other 5 talks on that. But suffice it to say at this point that it is forming part of the toolbox of coral restoration, of coral protection. So yeah, and I'm working on my thesis is about really growing corals specifically for coastal protection, because corals actually attenuate wave energy that's coming in. So it's looking at actually finding an effective investment mechanism specifically for that. Um, do our projects incorporate access for local community? Yes. Yes. Yeah. Remember, I'm from Barbados. I'm not about the rich tourists, really. I'm about taking their money and using it wisely for conservation, which then benefits the community. So I don't, I glossed over it in my presentation, but we always have a stakeholder advisory committee. And that stakeholder advisory committee is comprised of people from the communities also. Um, and we can't go in and start any project unless we talk to the communities and find out what the communities want. And it all sounds nice and fluffy and all that, but the reality is that no MPA is going to work unless it has the community on their side. In Barbados, the first MPA, which was done before I was born, I think, the government just came one day and said, boom, you can't fish here anymore, done. And the fishers were like, are you crazy? I've been fishing here for long. You can't come and tell me that. So when enforcement was not there between 8 and 5 and on weekends, the fishers are out there fishing like crazy. There's no way a government can enforce 24/7, right? So if the fishers don't get it, they don't understand why, they're not going to adhere to any rule you have. Um, so they're a really important part of the management. And for each one, we're pushing this participatory management. But that wasn't your question. It was incorporating access. Oh, the community is never denied access, never. And in fact, in many places, yes, there's a user fee, but the user fee is less for local inhabitants or no user fee at all for local inhabitants. And we don't get into that. That's a local discussion. You all decide how it is you're going to do it. But when we do our feasibility studies, we don't include the local community. I'm just going to give a caveat here because what COVID has done for our project in the Philippines, for example, since the tourists have stopped coming in, right? The Philippines actually has a very large local tourism market, right? So we have, actively had to start looking at um, charging, or what the user fees should be for a local market that actually have a stake in this MPA. But yeah, definitely access for local communities. In fact, one of the money generating mechanisms I didn't mention is visitor centers. So in each MPA, we look at setting up high-tech visitor centers using virtual reality. Um, so no live animals or anything like that, just virtual reality fun, and you learn as you go. And one of the primary reasons for having that, what we call the sensorium, is so that locals can come in and learn more about the marine environment and kind of use that as a stepping stone to going in the water. Barbados is not the only place where many of the inhabitants can't swim. That's like a Caribbean dilemma. So that's a step. So I became a dive instructor, for example, so I could train Bajans, Barbadians, how to dive, so they would get in the water, so they would understand, so they would come back and help me protect corals. It worked with a few people, not with everything. Um, I mentioned fishing and pollution as issues facing coral reef. Yeah, I spoke about, yeah, ocean temperatures. Um, how do we approach it? Yeah, you know what? That's another bugbear for me actually, because a lot of ecologists coming up now are only speaking about global climate change, and high temperatures is an issue for coral reefs. And there are a bunch of papers that have shown that if you control your local impacts, i.e., fishing and pollution, that your corals are a lot more resilient and better able to handle changes in temperature. Say that if the temperature rises much more, they're going to die. That's just how it is. But what are we going to do? Throw up our hands and give up? No. They are if we can control these local impacts, they stand a better chance. So why are we still not doing it? And that is my question for every government I can think of. Why are we not doing it? Alistair, oh, you volunteered in Belize. Yeah, cool. Where did you volunteer? Alistair, where in Belize? If you're still here, maybe not. Okay. 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 That is very cool. And that's where, have you heard of TASA? Because that's where TASA is based. Oh, yeah, everybody goes to Did you actually dive there? Lighthouse Reef? It's phenomenal. I hope that you did not pass up an opportunity to at least snorkel there, because it's an amazing reef. Okay. Snorkel is great. Snorkel is fantastic.
Awesome. Well, if anybody has any final questions, that I think concludes our talk today. Awesome. Well, thanks for joining, and thank you so much, Angie, for coming to talk about us. I think this has been a very insightful talk, and we definitely have a lot of individuals on our team who are very interested in marine protected areas. So I think this was something very interesting for everybody to listen to.
Okay, great. Well, yeah, thanks for listening. It was good to chat honestly
Yes.
about some of the issues that we're having. So good luck. You can all get my email if you need any more information or any queries. Feel free to email. I'll respond.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Angie.
Thank you.
Have
Have a
a
good day.
lovely day.
Thanks. You too.
Bye.
Bye.